This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. Today we're going to go to Illinois, actually to Northern Illinois, and visit with a friend that I haven't spoken to for a while. He is someone who has got his own show and just so happens he's celebrating his 10th year anniversary with his show up in Galena, Illinois. P.T. Murphy is a friend of mine I've known for quite a while. I remember, I believe, first meeting him when he was working with David Parr back in Chicago, and they had the Chicago Cabaret. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but he was also involved with the creation of Magic Chicago, and then he has also just had a lot of friends, obviously, in and around the Chicago area that he grew up with and who have mentored him or influenced his magic in one way or another, and somebody who certainly has a deep background in magic. And it's interesting, too, because we do talk to a lot of stage magicians, we've talked to close-up magicians, but not necessarily to a lot of what I would call parlor magicians or people who really specialize in stand-up kind of a thing. And PT is one of those guys, again, who has been working like with his one-man show here, again, before with his two-man show, before he'd left Chicago to go to Galena. And Galena is just a, I can't really say a suburb of Chicago, but it is a little bit further up north from Chicago. So it's kind of in the area, I guess, if you will. So we're going to find out all about that and about his show and how he had migrated up there and how he developed the show and found the theater and all that kind of thing, because I think it's of interest to a lot of people who today would like to have their own flexibility of having their own place where they can go and perform. But it's not one of those things you just kind of flip the switch and all of a sudden you got success. It comes from years of hard work. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So please welcome my guest today, Mr. P.T. Murphy. Hey there, P.T. How are you, man?
Hey, Scott. How are you? Long time no see.
It has been quite a while. You are keeping that youthful look.
Well, thank you. You don't notice the gray coming in as quickly because it's gradual. The last time I saw you was at Magic Live, I think, in 2019. I believe you're right. Just before everything got shut down.
Just before COVID and everything. Because they didn't have Magic Live then for the next couple of years or anything. But that's right. That's always a great convention. Had you attended that convention frequently before, or was that your first Magic Live?
Not frequently. I think they were still doing it every other year, and I think I had gone a couple years prior. I've had friends that have been going to it since its inception, but for me, I think that was my second time going to Magic Live.
That's a fun one. Well, what about the bizarre conventions that? That Tony Andruzzi had used to put on.
Yeah, back in the day. Now, see, that was stuff I knew nothing about. I was still a teenager living in the suburbs. I knew nothing about those conventions until later, and I don't remember when the last one was.
Okay.
But I remember meeting Tony at Magic Incorporated. This is one of my favorite. He was friendly.
Yeah.
He was very open to sharing information. He had a twinkle in his eye that I didn't know if he was, I didn't know what he was up to. He sort of had that little twinkle as if he was holding something back. My favorite, I'd seen him lecture at Magic Inc., but he lived not too far from the shop, and I would travel from the suburbs and just hang out there for the day. And one day he was in there. I was downtown to attend an acting class later that evening, and Tony was there, and there was a man by the name of Father John who worked behind the counter. He was a Catholic priest, and on his days off, he'd come in and hang out at the magic shop, but he also drove a cab, which is already a weird story to begin with, right? So here's a Catholic priest, works at the magic shop, and part-time drives a cab.
It sounds like a joke right there.
I'm telling you, I was right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I'm at the magic shop, And Tony says, "Oh, it's time for me to go." And I say, "Yeah, it's time for me to go." And Father John's like, "Well, which way are you guys heading?" "I'm going south." And we were both like, "Well, we're going south."
Mm-hmm.
So here I am in a cab, the front seat, a priest is driving the cab.
Yeah.
And in the back seat, I'm with like evil incarnate Tony Andruzzi.
A Satanist.
And it wasn't lost on me. I was maybe 19 years old, 18, 19.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just such a awesome thing to be able to say to myself, here I am in Chicago. I just left the magic shop, and these are the two magicians I'm traveling southbound in a taxi cab with.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite Tony Andruzzi memories.
Well, it's kind of funny because you stop and think about how magic binds us, and how, regardless of our backgrounds or our interests or whatever it is, it's something we have in common. Is we lay aside our politics and our religion, our beliefs,
Absolutely.
and whatever, and it's like, hey, let me show you this new double lift.
And Tony was, if you had a question, Tony was more than happy to answer your questions, or refer you to certain material or that sort of thing.
Well, now you were talking
Really
about
nice guy.
hanging out then at the magic shops. I remember Don Weiberg telling me about how many magic shops they used to have back, I guess, in the day, when there were like six in this, within 2 blocks of downtown of each other, I guess, in the heyday and everything. But then a little at a time they started expanding, going to the suburbs, and then a little at a time started going out. So tell me about someone like Izzy Rizzy's and Riley's and some of the places that you used to hang out.
You know Don well. Don has a few years on me, so he remembers a period of time that only existed in history books for me. I mean that with love, Don.
Well, he's 88 years old now, so
yeah,
yeah.
And he looks great, and he sounds great.
He's fantastic.
And he's like the sweetest guy, and he has all this information. For me, I only read about the magic shops that were downtown, like Ireland's and some of the other places right around the loop. But for me, growing up on the South Side, the two main magic shops were a place called Izzy Rizzy's, which was across the street from a magic club called Little Bit of Magic.
You say magic club? Was it a lounge? Was it a bar? Or
it was a lounge. Yeah, okay. It was a lounge. It was a bar. I don't ever remember going in there, again, because I was so young.
Right.
I didn't know that I could walk in there and there might be a Sunday show for kids. I just didn't know any better. But there were Izzy Rizzy's and there was Riley's, and then there was Magic Inc. And those were the three main magic shops that were still around when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And we would take little trips to each one. Izzy Rizzy wasn't so far. I wasn't driving yet, so I'd have to ask my dad, "Hey, can you drive us to 63rd and Pulaski?" And he's like, "Sure. What are you doing over there?" Well, there's a magic shop. Or 111th, and I'm trying to remember if it was Western. I don't know. Riley's had a couple of locations. But the big trip was always Magic Incorporated. Mm-hmm. And that was a train ride, and then an L ride, and then a walk up Lincoln Avenue to 5082 North Lincoln.
Now, you probably went there not just to see what some of the newest magic was, but also to see who's hanging out there that day and learning from people, right?
In my teens, I didn't know any better. Mm-hmm. In my teens, I was probably there. I know for a fact that when I was younger, the guys working behind the counter might be somebody like Jim Steinmeier, might be Tim Felix. I don't know if you know Tim.
Him very well. Yeah, he's got Midwest Magic. Yeah. It's Hot Dog Saturdays. I love getting.
Yeah. Fred Zimmerman, who's a performer in Chicago. These are guys who are sort of the generation before us. Mm-hmm. And before, Jim Steinmeier went on to become Jim Steinmeier, he'd be hanging out. So there were guys that I was probably talking to. I had no idea who they were. Mm-hmm. Now, when I probably hit about 18, 19, and I was more mobile and I would sort of drive myself into the city to take acting classes, or just to drive up to go to the magic shop. I used to hang out there with Bruce Bernstein for just hours on end,
Hmm.
hours on end. And Bruce was so accommodating,
Now,
answered all my questions.
wasn't Bruce the guy who used to advertise in the Lincoln Ring all the time, had a lot of bill tricks and things? Was that the guy? Or am I
I'm
confusing him with
trying to
somebody else?
remember. I know that he
Or is he a coin
advertised
guy?
his linking. Bruce Bernstein is a mentalist.
Okay, I can think of a completely
Um,
different guy. Never mind.
you might know him. He created early on. He created I want to say packet trick, but it's more than that, called Psych Out.
Okay.
And Gabe published a compendium of his works a few years ago, and the title escapes me. If I could actually read anything that's on my shelf,
Okay.
I'd be able to tell you, but my eyesight's not as good as it used to be.
But Bruce was one of the guys you
Um,
used to hang out with. He was around your
oh
age
yeah,
then? Or
yeah.
you said? Okay.
Bruce is older. He used to work at Magic Inc.
Hmm.
During the daytime, during the week.
Yeah.
And he turned me on to just everything. He turned me on to the book Nightmare Alley and the movie Nightmare Alley
Wow.
by William Lindsay Gresham.
Yeah.
He turned me on to some Max Maven stuff.
By the way,
Um,
Nightmare Alley, let me just insert this for just a
yeah,
moment.
yeah,
That
yeah.
which recently with Guillermo, who had completed the new movie, then is phenomenal. I think the artistic pictures, it just is great. The cinematography is what I'm trying to say. But I went back to the original one. It's in black and white. I would recommend to people, if you've not yet seen Nightmare Alley, or even if you have, to see the original one that's in black and white on YouTube. You can watch for free.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it is available and out there, and has a little bit different kind of an ending than what Guillermo del Toro had. So it's worth going back and seeing. So I'm just saying you can go and take a look at that.
Yeah. And if you haven't read the book, you need to read the book.
Really?
The book is a bit different than either one of the movies.
Well, that's interesting.
And
Okay,
there
good.
are a few sections in the book that I was hoping I was going to see in the Guillermo del Toro version,
Mhm.
but probably for length, they
Had to cut it out.
didn't film them, or they edited
Mhm.
them out. But the book, I'd rank the book top, and then both movies a little bit side by side. I like both movies for different
Yeah.
reasons.
Well, it's interesting. I understand. I was listening to a podcast with Guillermo del Toro, and he was talking about how he had purchased the rights with that. He and help me, the fellow who had starred in the movie with him,
Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper. I think the two of them, as I understand it, a long time ago, I want to say in the 80s or 90s or sometime back then, purchased the rights for that because they had read the book, they saw the original, and they said, we can redo this in today. And they never got around to it or didn't get the funding. I don't know what the deal was until recently that they'd actually done that. So,
Yeah.
but they had it and held it for a long time because their intent was to make this new movie. So anyhow, yes, the book is available. And a while back, we had a podcast I did with Jeanette Andrews, in which we had a couple of books talking about the Devil in White City, which was another Chicago book and everything.
Yeah.
So here we are talking about, again, the magic word, Scotty's Book Club. So it's
Scotty, you're right.
So if you'll go to the website at themagicwordpodcast.com, on the one on Jeanette Andrews, we've got a couple of links there where you can help us on Amazon whenever you buy something, that we get a little love from them also. And I'll have a link then to this book that you can buy of the Nightmare Alley. So sorry.
Yeah,
off on a
no,
tangent.
that's okay.
It's a great book.
No, I just remember Bruce saying to me, okay, you have to read this book, right? Yep. And he turned me on to a lot of things. He turned me on to Eugene Burger. There was a lecture coming up. This was maybe 1983, 84. I don't remember. I was 18, 19 years old. And he said, you have to go to this. And he gave me the flyer. And my friend Frank Wright and I, who's my magic buddy since we were 12 years old, we're like, okay, if Bruce says we have to go, we're going to go. So that Saturday rolls around. Now, this was the early 80s, and Magic Inc. was still very busy for their lectures. Mm-hmm. This was before other magic shops and other magic clubs had sort of formed and lecturers were sort of branching off, and nowadays a lecturer may come to Chicago and do 3 or 4
That's correct.
lectures within the area. This is when it was still one central location, so there were a lot of people for this lecture.
Mm-hmm.
And we were standing in the lobby, and there were some guys out front smoking cigarettes. It was cold out, and there was this guy with bald and this long gray beard, and he was dressed in black. And I remember he had sort of the jacket of the time was the members only style jacket.
Mm-hmm.
And it was zipped up, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he had his round glasses. And I turned to my friend Frank and I said, I wonder who that rabbi looking dude is out front. And as if he had heard what we said,
Yeah.
he walked in, looked me right in the eye, and said, Hi, I'm Eugene Burger. And Frank and I were like, how did he hear us? How did he know?
Yeah.
And that lecture, I want to say it changed my life. It didn't change my life. It verified for me that there were people out there who really took magic seriously. I mean, not too seriously, but they took it seriously, and they wanted to present it well and share it with people. After seeing that lecture, I was just like, oh, this is so great. Because before, the only other person I had seen was Doug Henning on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug Henning, had a style where it was all about believing in magic, and you only saw him on TV unless you were lucky enough to see him live. But to see somebody up close who presented magic as if it were magical,
Mm-hmm.
like I hadn't seen that, I'm from Chicago, so myself included, my style, a lot of jokes, a lot of self-deprecating humor. I try to take certain serious moments seriously, but that sort of Chicago style of magic, Matt Schulian-esque, where everybody's involved and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to present a good time. Eugene had all of those elements, but he also had those moments of woo-woo where you were just like, whoa, what the heck just happened here?
You're exactly right. I believe Eugene did have that way of presenting that as something that was believable in a completely different style than Doug Henning, obviously. But Henning was also trying to say that this is magic and woo, look at this is cool. But I believe that, and they both created art in a different way. I think that Doug Henning's art was of the eyes. It was very visual with all the psychedelic colors and nature of the day with just that, kind of the hippie days, I guess, in the 60s and 70s that he had grown up in. And you see the colors of all of his costumes and his backdrops and his props and everything. Whereas Eugene was focusing something smaller, and his stage was just within about a 2-foot frame, basically, where with his hands and his voice, where he would create art. And I could see where he would have something that would be transformational, maybe not life-changing, but transformational to you, PT, in which that you then realize for the first time, this is not just a hobby or a fun thing to have, like Mike Amar would say, bubble gum for the eyes, but something that can be artistic, that people can remember and change them in some way to make them remember or to think about something. So that was kind of something I think that Eugene had offered. I think that's kind of what I hear you say.
For sure. Yeah, no, for sure. That was the thing. I remember thinking to myself, here's somebody who's, having only seen Doug Henning perform on TV and on stage,
Mm-hmm.
My takeaway from Doug Henning was that this was serious. He wanted it to be fun, but he also didn't want to sort of brush off how important the magic was. That's the thing I got from Eugene.
Mm-hmm.
That moment of magic, that moment of amazement,
that was important.
Is important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the same thing. But here was a guy who was sitting right in front of me,
mm-hmm.
and he's performing magic. And
Yeah.
I had never experienced that. I mean, I'd seen a lot of close-up magic living in Chicago, but never somebody who said, "Hey, watch this. I'm
Hmm.
going to blow your mind." It was more sort of treated as a joke or,
Now,
"Hey, that's amazing."
did you see him then later? Of course, he was working at Biggs, I think it was,
Yeah,
there in
yeah,
Chicago as a
yeah,
regular. So you could see him publicly. I know he did a lot of private performances and then started traveling all over the world. But did you see him in his element, I guess, when he was working in the
yeah.
restaurant?
I used to go to Biggs quite frequently. He would perform in the dining room on request, but he would also perform. There was a lounge, um, sort of sub street level. You kind of had to go down the stairs like Cheers. You had
Hmm.
to go down the stairs and you could enter this lovely lounge, a small little bar, maybe 10 tables. And I would just sit at the bar. Um, and, the bartenders were very cool. I don't drink, but, I would have a Diet Coke. And I would make sure that I tipped well so that he didn't think I was some deadbeat just nursing my Diet Coke and
Right.
wasn't gonna tip him. Um, but yeah, I would watch Eugene go from table to table, and
Hmm.
I would just watch, and that was the best. Those
Did
were the
you,
best lessons,
what was
just
the
watching him
dynamic?
perform.
What was the dynamic with the people who were at his table? In other words, did you feel like they were having a good time and they were fun, and then he would come
Oh
and it's
yeah,
like he had a different disposition after he left the table,
no,
thinking, "What the heck happened there?" What was that
no,
like?
Eugene was a very friendly personality.
Hmm.
And I think part of the genius with Biggs is people knew that he was circulating. So they knew that this man might come over and say, "Hi, how are you? Would you like to see some magic?" Or they had requested him.
Yeah,
So they were expecting it.
gotcha.
And when Eugene came to sit down, Eugene was having just as much fun as everybody else at the table. Um, I guess maybe you might think that he would get kind of serious, but it wasn't. He didn't alter the mood. He kept the festivities alive, and he added to the discussion. He added, if people were out as a group, he would have the group interact with each other,
Hmm.
and then he might just end the set by completely frying their mind, and you'd hear this giant gasp from the group, and he would kind of walk away smiling, and then the next group would be like, "What's going on over there?" And he'd be like, "Oh, well, here, pick a card." So it was sort of the master of ceremonies.
Now I can kind of see that also happening with Bill Malone, as he would be
Oh my
working in a
gosh.
restaurant. So,
Okay. Now, and I know what I said earlier about Eugene, and I had never seen magic performed the way Eugene performed it. I don't mean to interrupt, but backstory. Um, I met my friend Frank when I was 12.
mhm.
I had an interest in magic, but Frank performed the French drop and blew my mind. Blew my mind. We were 12, and here was a kid who could make things disappear. I was like, "You have to show me how you did that." I'm 57 now. That was 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
We're still friends. So Frank and I performing magic, we're maybe 15, 16. Frank was driving, so he was probably 16. He has about 6 months on me. I was maybe still 15. We went to a place on the south side called Houdini's Pub and Pizza Magic.
Hmm.
And I believe that Bill and his wife owned the establishment. I don't know that for a fact, but I think that was their place. And they had a small stage, and they had magicians that circulated, performing close up. And I remember us going to check it out, and we're like, "Wow, that's really cool. I wonder if we can get a job here."
Yeah.
So we talked to, I don't know if we talked to Barbara, if we talked to, I don't remember who we talked with, but they said, "Come back on this date and you can perform for some of the people it was like a weeknight, so it was going to be a little quieter.
Right.
And we'll see how you guys do. And if you work out, then you can work here. Well, this day comes. It is the coldest day of the year. Probably the coldest day of the year up to that point in Chicago.
Okay.
So it was minus whatever it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't International Falls, Minnesota cold, but it was cold enough that the dashboard in people's cars were cracking,
Mm-hmm.
cars weren't starting. And we're thinking, what are we going to do? Are we going to go? We can't cancel. This is our big break to audition for Houdini's Pub and Pizza Magic. We got in our car. We drove. It was a few miles from where we lived. We drove. We get there. Nobody's there. Bill and his wife are there.
Yeah.
Nobody's there. Nobody's out. Nobody's on the road. We walk in and Bill's like, hey, how are you? Super, super sweet. Bill Malone, super nice guy.
Yeah.
He's like, nobody's here. He goes, I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. He goes, come on, hang out at the bar. So there we were, sipping Cokes and eating pretzels and popcorn. And Bill Malone is doing card magic for us.
Mm-hmm.
Private audience. Again, I remember this like it happened yesterday. It just completely fried my mind. And he was very low key, super funny, but he wasn't like he was, you see him performing for groups. He was very casual and very humble and low key. He wasn't busting out the jokes for us,
Right.
but he was like, hey, you guys, come here, let me show you this. And he was showing us moves, and that day I will take with me forever.
Did you come
super
back?
Sweet guy.
Did you come back at a later
No,
time then?
are you kidding me?
That was
After
it.
watching him do card magic, we got in the car and we're like, we're not ready for this.
We're not that level.
We're not worthy. We are not worthy.
Yeah. Speaking of that, you had beforehand, we were just talking briefly about Ricky Jay also, and that was another one I think could kind of, you have a great story about him.
So these are, I don't collect things, right? I mean, I have a couple of items, magic items that I appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Means something to you, sure.
That means something to me. Gabe Fahuri, for those of you that don't know Gabe, he owns Potter and Potter Auctions. He recently had an auction of David Roth memorabilia, stuff from David's personal collection. And there was a Ricky Jay poster that was inscribed to David. And for those of you that don't know, when Ricky Jay was performing his 52 Assistants show, it debuted in New York, I think.
Correct.
And eventually came to Chicago.
Right.
And
it was at the Old Vic Theater, I think, for a while in London as well.
Sure, yes.
Then it was on HBO as a special.
It was on HBO. I'm wondering, how did HBO coerce Ricky Jay into allowing his show to be filmed,
to be recorded? Yeah, because I know he was very particular about that.
I don't know Ricky Jay. I met him once. That's my story. But he just didn't seem like the kind of guy that would be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem.
Well, David Roth was considered the 53rd assistant.
So here's my story.
Okay.
And I don't collect stuff, but I collect memories, and I have a few memories. My memory of Bill Malone, my memory of meeting Eugene Burger, my memory of working for Jay Marshall at Magic Inc. So I mean, I have things.
And you remember when I
collect.
sat there with you and David Parr the first time you met me? And
the first time I met
after
Scott
Magic
Wells
Cabaret
was at the Magic Cabaret. And he pointed an indiscretion out to me that I was not aware of. I don't know if you remember this. We had a bookmark in a book.
Oh.
And I may have forgotten to take the bookmark out before the show started. You're like, you don't want to have that bookmark.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah.
So I got to know Eugene fairly well, as did many of us living in Chicago. Eugene was very generous with his time. He was very generous with his friendship. a lot of us would get together, go out as groups to eat dinner, lunch, what have you. So Eugene was really involved in the Chicago Magic community, and
Hmm.
um, he was really, as a friend, he was very generous. So he calls me up one night. He says, "Hey, do you want to go see Ricky Jay and his 52 assistants?" I'm like, "What kind of question is that?" I said, "Of course I do."
Yeah.
He said, "Okay." He goes, "I just got a last minute gig. I cannot go." I'm going to do some name dropping in this story, but it's not to drop names. It's to share how excited I was about
Okay.
this evening because it's one of my favorite magic memories ever. So Eugene Burger says to me, "Meet Paul Harris at my apartment. He'll have your ticket. You and Paul Harris, close up kind of
Hmm.
guy.
Hmm.
Paul Harris, Twilight Paul Harris, Paul Harris, Books of Astonishment Paul Harris." I'm like, "That Paul Harris?" He's like, "Yes, that Paul Harris. Meet him at my apartment. You guys can take a cab up, and I'll see you guys after the show." I go to Eugene Burger's apartment. Those of you that want to visit Chicago and pay homage, you can visit 1260 North Dearborn, and that's where Eugene lived for as long as I can remember. Um, Ring the bell. Paul Harris answers the door, lets me in. There's Paul Harris. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up in the 70s doing magic. Paul Harris was like,
Had all of his books probably back then too. Yeah.
right. I mean, they're all bookmarked and
Right.
dog-eared, and they're all sitting on my shelf.
Great stuff.
And I was like, "Blah, blah, 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 hi, blah, 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 blah." Now, I'm in my 30s, right? I didn't think I was going to be starstruck. And
Yeah.
Paul was super mellow, super nice.
Yeah.
We get in the cab, we get to the theater. We're standing in the lobby. David Roth walks up. All right.
Hmm.
Eugene Burger, Paul Harris, David Roth. In one night, David
Hmm.
Roth walks up. He's like, "Hey, Paul, how are you? You guys are going to love this show." And he turns to me specifically, goes, "You are going to love this show." And it's like he'd always known me. It wasn't like, "I don't know who you are."
Hmm.
He was just super friendly from the get-go.
Yeah.
Watch the show. Great show. Ricky
Hmm.
was so good. It was such an affirming sort of experience for somebody who wanted to perform magic for real people. Here was somebody performing at a very high level. There was humor, there was drama, there was mystery. My favorite part of that magic show, and this is when I knew that there was hope for me yet. Ricky does a multiple selection, and I think he closes the first act where he finds 10 different cards.
Hmm.
And at one point, he's holding the deck. He's holding the deck like this, maybe. I don't remember I think he's holding it like this. At one point, he turns to the woman and says, "And your card was?" And he does the old pull the hair and
Yanks
pull the
on the
card up
Yeah, yanks on the
with the
invisible
thumb.
hair.
I thought, and the audience just died laughing. I thought, "Oh my gosh, here I am worried about something new, and here's somebody who's embraced these old, I want to say bits. They were more than
Hmm.
bits." Um, but it was so funny. And I just remember that moment specifically in the show where I thought, wow, there is hope for me. There's hope for me. Not that I can do the card magic that Ricky Jay can do.
Yeah.
But his sense of humor was delightful. So after the show, Eugene says, "Hey, you and Paul hop in a cab, meet me at the restaurant across the street from my house." Okay.
Hmm.
So we go back. We're at the restaurant. Paul Harris, Eugene Burger, David Roth shows up. Mike Kozlowski. I don't know
I know, Mike.
the people that know Mike. He's the one that invented the
Dollar bill, $100 bill
$100
switch.
bill. Yeah.
Switch. Right.
I mean, that's like, if that's the only thing that he's ever contributed to magic, he can rest easy, right? Super nice guy, Chicago guy, super sweet. Ricky Jay. So it's Paul Harris, David Roth, Eugene Burger, Mike Kozlowski, Ricky Jay, and myself. sitting around the table.
I would, if I were in that group, I'd look around and say, one of these things doesn't belong.
I
What
just
am I
sat there
doing here?
all night long like this, just listening,
Yeah.
just listening. And I remember at one point, it was a friendly conversation. At one point, Ricky just turned to Eugene. He said, "Hey, do you really believe you can teach people how to do magic?" And Eugene sort of sheepishly laughed, and he's like, "Well, yeah, I hope so." And here I was. I mean, it was like Jerry Garcia, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, I mean, these were guys who I had only read about in books.
Mm-hmm.
So to finish my Ricky Jay story, Gabe has for auction the poster from 52 Assistants, and it's David Roth's copy of the poster inscribed by Ricky Jay, and it's something like, "To the remarkable Mr. Roth, trusted and valued 53rd assistant." And I saw that poster, and like I said, I don't collect anything, but I said, I have to have that poster. I have to. So I just,
So you
did
did.
the credit card for as much as I could, and I got the poster.
How great is that?
So it's like that whole story came full circle.
Very
and
cool.
It just, as
Very
a kid
cool.
growing up on the South Side, you run into these guys and you're like, "What? Pinch me. This is crazy."
So all those things obviously contributed to your passion for magic and how that you continued then, and then decided, I love Chicago and everything. And you and I assume David Parr had been friends for a long time before you came up with them with the idea of the Magic Cabaret downtown.
Well,
and that ran for like, what, 18 months or something? Or how long was
oh,
that?
geez, no. The Magic Cabaret ran for close to 10 years.
10 years. Wow, am I way off? Okay.
Now, I was there for about 6 of those years.
Okay.
And then I left to move to Galena, and David and Joe Diamond continued the show.
Okay.
David and I met probably through Eugene, because I know David and Eugene were close. But David was living just south of the magic shop. He used to come in on weekends when I was working there at Magic Incorporated, and that's really how we started talking. I had co-created another show called Magic Chicago with Benjamin Barnes and Robert Charles, and I was there for maybe 6 months, and then I went on to do Magic Cabaret with David. So David and I did that show for quite a while, once a week.
And that was,
until
just as it sounds, like a
2012.
cabaret where the two of you were doing things. When I had seen the show again, I mentioned when I was introducing you, as far as it wasn't close up, it was a parlor situation where you were doing stand up.
For sure.
And it wasn't
Yeah.
like stand up comedy. I mean, it wasn't like Harry Anderson type of stuff. I mean, there were really some mysteries and things that you had done. And I thought your characters complemented each other beautifully as well.
Thank you. That was my goal in working with David. I thought to myself, secretly, not so secretly, but we spoke about this, but I didn't want to analyze it too much. There's, I want to say sibling rivalry probably isn't the right word. But growing up as a kid, one of my favorite comedy teams were the Smothers Brothers.
Of course.
So I sort of loved the way they played off of each other, and there was bickering, but they cared about each other clearly. For David and I, at least for me, hopefully the goal was to create a show where these two very different personalities present a magic show. And David and I were firm on wanting it to be a magic show. We didn't want to shy away from the fact that we were magicians. We did magic. We want you to come. We didn't want to call ourselves, I don't know, all the other words that people use besides magician or magic show. We wanted to embrace Chicago and the word magician and the term magic show. but our goal was,
and that was different from Magic Chicago, because that really featured other magicians, whereas Magic Cabaret was just
correct.
the two of you guys. The other one
Yes.
was more of a variety of revolving magicians.
Correct. The original concept with Magic Chicago was sort of to bring a bit of Monday Night Magic, like Michael Chout's show in New York, where there was sort of a collective of magicians.
And was that in the same theater where you had done the cabarets, or is that a different part of town?
That was in a completely different location.
Okay.
And then David and I decided we wanted to do a show weekly. Magic Chicago was once a month. David and I wanted to do something on a weekly basis. And initially we started, we'd have a guest performer. And then we realized that the guest performers, as wonderful as they were, we had sort of created this show with a faint through line. And then all of a sudden we're throwing in this guest act.
A variety act, almost.
A variety act, yeah.
It changed the dynamic.
A magician.
Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah. So we decided that we were just going to add, a couple more minutes each and do the show. So the show was David and I opening the show, and then each one of us would perform a piece. Then we would perform a piece together. Then each one of us would perform something individually, and then we would end with a piece together. But the goal was always to play off of each other in terms of our personalities. For me, my hope was that was going to be the through line for the show. Here I am annoying David, and here David is being annoyed by me, or vice versa. But ultimately we come together and we perform something.
So it really becomes more theater rather than just unrelated one magic trick after another one. I know at the Peller Theater at the Magic Castle, they often will book two magicians. Let's say I've seen Dave Cox and Bruce Gold work together, similar to what you're talking about, where they start off together, then the two of them come back and forth. The same thing with Paul Draper and Christian Cagigal. So those kind of guys have a nice dynamic. So not everybody can have that kind of working relationship and friendship without there being some jealousy, animosity, or something, or bickering in which that they're going to maybe break apart. But the ones I'd mentioned, you included, that seems like had you could tell that you were comfortable in your roles. Yeah,
the good thing for us both was we weren't an act. Like, it wasn't Siegfried and Roy. We were two separate performers.
Yeah.
And we always agreed on the magic, and we always agreed on how we wanted to present the show to the audience. I mean, there were moments where we might argue about something, but we never, it was more like, well, should we use a red silk here, or should we use a green silk here? It was never arguing about the magic. It was more arguing about the particulars.
Artistic portions?
It was more a discussion than it was.
Gotcha. Okay.
No drop down, drag out fights or anything like that.
And so after about 6 years, again, you decided that you were going to move out of Chicago and decided to Galena, because Galena is probably about 40 miles north of northwest of
Galena is 3 hours northwest of Chicago.
Okay, I'm way out. I knew it was north. I didn't know how far north. I knew it wasn't a suburb, but
Galena is number 3 in the state of Illinois for tourism.
Isn't it up kind of near
Springfield,
near Wisconsin, near
it's right here. It's sort of the tri-state. It's Illinois. I'm pointing as if there's a map here, and nobody can see me because it's a podcast. It's the northwest corner of Illinois. We're about 15 miles from Dubuque, and maybe 10 miles from Wisconsin.
Okay, I was going to say Lake Geneva, but you're not where near.
No.
Okay.
Starts with a G, but a different magician.
Okay.
Tristan Christ is in Geneva, Lake Geneva.
Oh, okay. So why'd you find Galena? I mean, of all places, rather than just going to the other part of Chicago. I mean, you got 3 hours out of town. Yeah.
Well, here's the long story short. I was working a day job to support my family.
Hmm.
I used to work for the American Library Association, producing conferences for them. The atmosphere, the environment was changing drastically. Things were changing for the association. People were getting laid off.
Hmm.
Um, I knew somewhere in the cards that this was going to be happening to me. Some things had gotten outsourced that I was doing in-house. Also, my wife and I had bought a condo 2006, I believe, and this was right as the market nationwide was just tanking. So it was this perfect storm. Our condo, we were underwater. My job, it looked like I probably was going to get laid off.
Hmm.
Um, and so we kind of took the bull by the horns. We talked to our real estate attorney, who's a friend of ours. We negotiated a short sale for our condo, which was hard to do. Um, and we moved to Galena. In that time, I had been let go from my position.
Hmm.
Um, so we were free um, to go. I had, shared this with David probably 6 months before everything came down. I said, I think things don't really look good right now. I think I'm going to get let go.
Hmm.
And if I let go, we're going to move. Um, so we made arrangements for a replacement. Um, and then in 2013, after everything was finalized, I had been let go from the association. We moved to Galena. Now, why Galena? My wife had an aunt who was a nun just outside of town. There's an order of nuns that was founded in the 1840s.
Hmm.
Her aunt was one of those nuns, not from the 1840s, but from, the 1960s. We used to come up and visit her.
Yeah.
And we thought to ourselves, this is a great town. Um, there's not much going on here. It would be great to move out here. I wonder if I could do a magic show here. But it was just sort of out there in the ether. It
Yeah.
wasn't a reality until these things
Yeah.
came to
Stars all
fruition.
aligned and kind of
Yeah,
forced
yeah.
your hand, then, so to speak. And then trying to
It,
find that location of where you are currently. What's the name of the theater, or where are you?
well, the name of the business is P.T. Murphy Magic Theater,
Okay.
and I'm located right in the heart of downtown Galena. Um, and I have a tiny little 24 seat space
Hmm.
that I've sort of converted. It's I want to say I modeled it after the close-up room at the Magic Castle, but it's not as opulent as the close-up room.
So do
In
you
the
do both
rake,
close up and stand up in there?
it's parlor, like you said.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm standing up and performing.
Okay.
Um, I'm not sitting down. Um, but there are a few things that happen that are smaller.
Hmm.
But the space is small enough that I can do that.
Sure.
Um, and my 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 originally I called Gabe Fahuri and I was like, hey, I've just been to Galena, Illinois, and I was thinking maybe I should open a magic shop and do a magic show in Galena. And this was maybe 2011, early 2012. Um, I don't remember what year exactly, but Gabe responded with, oh, hey, John Carney's going to be doing a show in Galena this summer. And I thought to myself, what is John Carney doing in Galena?
Hmm.
And he said, oh, John grew up in Iowa and he's going to be out there for the summer and he's going to be workshopping some stuff. And I thought to myself, oh no, here goes my dream right out the window.
Hmm.
My wife and I went and saw John's show. It was wonderful. John was a super sweet guy. Afterwards, I said to my wife, well, he's probably going to fall in love with Galena like we did, and he's going to want to stay. And, this is a great place to move to, especially if, he knows the area because he's from Dubuque. And Then I sent him an email. I said, John, this isn't something I usually do, but are you planning on staying? And his response was, no, give me a call. he's like, here's my contact list. Here's the person I was renting the theater from. He was super sweet, super gracious. So that was just another sort of signpost for me saying, okay, everything's falling into place.
Yeah.
Even though I'm losing my job,
Well,
there's hope for me.
I remember hearing about that when John was there. I want to say for the summer. He was there for 2 or 3 months or for a period of time.
Yeah, he was there for the summer. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of a one-off thing. And I thought, that's odd. I don't remember how that I'd heard about that, but I knew that he had some sort of a venue. So that's the one that you ultimately took over for the P.T. Murphy Theater.
Well, that space is the space that I started out in because it was the only space I knew about.
Mm-hmm.
Without going into a lot of detail, I was forewarned by John and other people in town that the person that I was renting this space from may not be the most reputable person to do business with.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in knowing that first year was just to establish myself, and then I would hopefully find a different space. I have a great story about the owner of that original space. They ran a trolley business, and the trolleys weren't up to code. And the state and the feds were called to investigate this person's business. And while they were investigating this business, they also were taking a look at her property. And behind the property was a little theater where I was doing the show. And one thing led to another, and she freaked out and locked all my props in the theater.
Oh my gosh.
There was no way, and this was like my last show of the season, right? There was no way I was going to be able to get my stuff out. She changed the locks on the theater. Now I thought to myself, what would Harry Houdini do? Well, Harry Houdini would pick the locks.
Of course.
And I thought, well, the last thing I want to do is get caught breaking and entering into a business that's not mine. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, I still have the key to the office. She gave me the key to the office. Uh-huh. And in the office were the new keys to the theater. Oh. So
that's
I
easy
went
way.
in,
yeah.
I opened the theater, I took all my stuff out, and then I locked everything up, and I put my key under the door,
right,
so that they would have that key. I didn't want to have any keys to a place that I wasn't doing business at. And I remember my friends who worked there, the ones that had warned me before I started, they were like, oh, it was hysterical. She was so upset. She's like, how did he get his stuff out of there? How did he get all of that stuff? And as a magician, I was very proud of myself. And as a law-abiding citizen, I was proud of myself.
You did it the right way.
Yeah, I did it the right way.
You did it the right way.
So yeah, and then I was able to find the space that I'm currently in. I have a great landlord. I have a great location. I have this little loft space above me. And I'm centrally located to visitors coming to Galena.
And you say it's a high tourist area then too. In the final moments we've got over here of the podcast as well, I want just to, you say you're celebrating in your 10th year of being there in Galena. Yeah. How do people find the theater if they want to come see the show or to get tickets? I'm sure there's an online place.
They can visit my website, ptmurphy.com. And you can purchase tickets online. It's probably the fastest and easiest way. If you want to shoot me an email, you can do so at the website, or you can give me a call. There's also another website if you're visiting Galena, and I highly recommend a visit to Galena. It is, if you live in Illinois especially and you've never been to Galena, you're going to freak out because Illinois is so flat in some parts, but there are so many hills in Galena, you're going to think you're in another country. But you can visit the tourism bureau, which is visitgalena.org. So I'm at ptmurphy.com, and then more on the city, visitgalena.org.
Are you planning on anything special for your 10th anniversary? Or for
Staying
this year,
in business.
Staying in business.
Staying in business. More of the same.
Good.
I just bought a new suit, So
hmm
get ready for a new look. I have a few new things I'm going to put in the show.
Yeah.
I've reached out to the Visitors Bureau. Hopefully, there'll be some more press and that sort of thing. But it's so busy here, and I feel so fortunate to be here that I just want to celebrate my 10th year by having as busy a year as I possibly can.
Do you do more than just the one show once a week, or do you do two in that same night, or have you thought about expanding
It depends on
the
the
season?
time of year.
Yeah, exactly.
In the busy season, I can do 6 to 10 shows a week.
Okay.
This month has been fairly busy. I've been doing 4 shows a week in January because the weather's been cooperating with us.
hmm
And I'm open all year round. I do a lot of shows because I only have 24 seats.
Yeah.
I like the size.
The
I like
intimacy's nice.
24. I
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah.
And I think it's a selling point for the people that have been here before. I get a lot of return customers, which
Yeah.
even freaks me out even to this day. And I'm so grateful. They bring their friends, they tell their friends, but they all say the same thing. It's so awesome. We're so close. I've never seen a magic show this close before.
Yeah. Well, you've
And
had a
I'd
long
love
and
to bet.
you've had a long and varied career, so I know that there have been a lot of things that you've told us about as far as what have inspired you and everything. So, what kind of inspiration can you give our guests? What I'd like to close with the podcast is, since it's called the Magic Word Podcast, of what is it that is your magic word or phrase? What's your philosophy?
Wow.
What's important to you?
There is a term that my friends and I have been bandying about since I moved here.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, Gordon Meyer, who's an author, he and another friend of mine, Fred Turner, we sort of hunkered down during the pandemic, and we would do weekly magic calls, and we'd share tricks back and forth, and we'd share books and videos and that sort of thing. So that sort of kept us going through the pandemic. But one of the terms that we bandy about is living the dream. So Gordon will say, you're living the dream. And it dawned on me a while ago, heck yeah, I am living the dream. As a kid, I dreamt of becoming a magician. And here I am. I'm supporting my family. I have a nice house. I have 2 cars that I have to pay off. I'm able to buy clothes and food and nice things. And I am living the dream. But there is a lot of hard work that goes into making that dream a reality. And it's not bad work. It's work that I love to do. So I guess if you want to live the dream is the initial seed. Working hard to reach that dream. It's not just going to happen by itself. You just don't wake up or fall asleep and you're automatically a magician. There's living the dream, but there's also working the dream. Because I love what I'm doing, and I pinch myself every day I wake up, and I'm grateful every day, every evening I leave after a show. But there is a lot of hard work that goes in to sustaining this sort of thing. And keep that in mind as you're working towards your dream.
That's great. Yeah, what I hear you saying is feed your dreams, because that's what's going to
dreams.
make them
I
grow.
remember Eugene used to say, you're a professional magician when it's 8:00 and you've got to go to work.
I like that. I like that. Good place to close. PT, thank you very much for being my guest today. This has been just delightful.
Scott. It was great talking to you. It was good seeing you. Hopefully I'll see you in person later in the year.
I hope to stop up to Galena and see the show there sometime when I'm in
you're
Chicago.
always
I
welcome.
got to drive up there to see that. That's great. Well, congratulations again on the 10 years, and I hope you have another 50 there. That'd be great.
I appreciate that. Same to you.
Thank you very much. So the
Take
Magic
care.
Word Podcast. That was PT Murphy. This is Scotty out.